We're going to be talking about anxiety disorders today, fear, compulsive, OCD type based disorders. We may get into some phobias as well. Worry and worry and anxiety. Okay, so there's some levels of anxiety and worry that are very normal, that are part of everyday living. You try something new, um, you have a test, you are have a job interview, you have a competition. These are some things that cause people to get anxious or worried or concerned that are very normal. I think in our society right now, this is some of the behaviors that unfortunately we don't see as normal, for various reasons. And as a result, I think we overgeneralize sometimes anxiety, or we try to tell our children that they're anxious, and it makes it seem like it's a problem, like more of a problem than maybe what it is. So just something to think about. There's a book, it's called Anxious Generation, might be something worth reading for you eventually. Worry, anxiety, fear. What are they? Worry and anxiety and fear can be viewed as existing on several dimensions. The extent to which they are related, potentially approaching on imminent threats, the extent to which they involve cognitions and feelings, and the severity when they create significant difficulties. So, for example, like the anxiety I was talking about, having a test, trying something new, coaching a team, and being having an event like a game. Those are things that are pretty normal. They're gonna face some level of anxiety. Where it becomes abnormal is, like, let's say it's more than just a tummy ache that goes away. It's something that lasts a long time. Maybe it causes you not to leave your home. Maybe the anxiety causes you not to try anything new, and you really paralyze yourself and limit yourself. Um, it's causing you other somatic symptoms physically, like maybe some people have diarrhea, some people have headaches, some people have eye twitching, heart racing, panic attacks. When it starts to get to that severe, that's when we're like, there might be a problem. And so, as we look at, for example, panic attacks, so a panic attack involves a period of time in which a person experiences intense feelings of fear, apprehension that something terrible will happen, and there's physical symptoms. Um, Sometimes it will have symptoms like a heart attack. Um, Sometimes they can come up without warning, like maybe there's not even something specifically going on, but the panic attack will come on. And sometimes they are expected based on a trigger. This is the thing though, panic attacks are pretty hard to deal with, especially if they happen on a regular basis. And this is where clients need to consider, what do we need to do about this? Yes, therapy, there might be medication treatment, um, coping skills. We need to learn how to deal with the panic or what's causing the panic. Um, Always with clients, I've said this before, but with any sort of medical issue, we want to make sure that we are ruling out medical problems. So we want to go to a doctor, consult with a doctor, things of that nature, especially with a panic attack, and people could feel like they're having a heart attack. We're not doctors. Someone could be having a heart attack. So it may not be a bad idea to go to the doctor just to make sure. So a panic disorder is more regular, right? At least one of these attacks followed by a month or more of concern about having another attack. Panic attacks are not harmful, but many people with panic disorder become terrified of their own internal sensations. A lot of people get panic about panicking. Sounds kind of funny or strange, but it happens quite a bit. It's like that panic attack was so miserable, they don't want to go through that again. Okay. Very common, something that happens. Social anxiety disorder. I think this is something I find more like on the newer side. I think post COVID we hear about this way more. The anxiety or the frustration when people are trying to do things with other people. They might get panic symptoms. They're anxious. They think it's hard to be around crowds, things of that nature. Worried about how they could embarrass somebody or themselves when out in public. But I think we saw more of these as clinicians, these diagnoses, after COVID, when we kind of couldn't do anything. And then the idea of going back out into the real world really upset not what I shouldn't say upset people, but they were caused some level of stress or strain due to navigating that. So social anxiety disorder is something that you will come across for sure. Okay, specific phobia. I think I've mentioned this before. I am trained in EMDR, which is something we use for trauma. Specific phobia involves excessive unreasonable fear of a particular object or situation. So this is where you might have animal phobias, natural environment phobias, blood injection type phobias, situational phobias. What we call a process phobia is something that's like, I'm afraid of flying. And so that phobia might start as soon as you book travel, because you know you're going to fly. As soon as you pack your suitcase, there's like a process to getting to the airport or to the plane. That is more of a process phobia. Specific phobia is like, I mean, there's a ton of phobias out there, but specific phobia is something like I'm afraid of spiders or whatever. I was in the grocery store not too long ago, standing in line, and I was chewing some gum. I had someone come up to me and told me that they were going to stand away from me because they had a phobia to the sound of chewing. I was like, wow, okay. I commend you for being that open and honest. It was a little unique, but I was like, okay. Everyone's allowed to have their thoughts and opinions, but there's many different phobias out there. Generalized anxiety disorder is something that you'll see most common. It's a very common diagnosis. And so it's like a strong, persistent, extreme level of worry about various events or activities. People with generalized anxiety disorder have trouble controlling their worry and thus often have trouble concentrating, sleeping, or resting. I think we see this a lot with clients. Doing CBT work with them is super important. Their anxiety or worry is debilitating to some degree. It limits them, which is why they need the help of medication. You notice too with generalized anxiety disorder, you will have the somatic symptoms. So maybe the heart palpitations, the sweating, the spiraling, the rapid thought process potentially, a lot of different things that can happen when a person struggles with generalized anxiety disorder. OCD is something that we very stereotypically think about washing your hands or germs, but OCD can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Involves obsessions and compulsions. There's two parts to it. So when you're assessing a person, you need to make sure you meet all the criteria. Compulsions are the rituals or habits repeated to reduce anxiety. So if you're like, if I step on a crack, I'm gonna break my mother's back. The compulsion would be making sure you don't break your mom's back. So how do I know I don't break my mom's back? The obsessions are the troublesome thoughts or impulses or images. So those are the thinking parts of things, but then the compulsions are usually the acting out parts of things. So contamination is a common fear, doubt, need for order, impulse towards aggression, sexual imagery can be something that people get OCD about. Okay. Obsessive compulsive related disorders. There's hoarding. I'm sure if you've seen hoarders, what they do, there's an issue with not wanting to let things go. There's trichotillomania mania. That's with the hair pulling. Let's see, skin picking. That's a new thing, like where minors will pick their skin. They'll just sit there and pick. Not good. Body dysmorphic disorder. This is when people see themselves not how they actually are. They usually see themselves in a disparaging way, not in a good way, whether that's from once being maybe overweight and then losing a lot of weight and not being able to really see themselves for who they are, or there's other things that cause body dysmorphic disorder, like maybe they have always been thin, but they see themselves as another way, and they're very frustrated and angry with themselves. PTSD, we talk about PTSD often. PTSD can happen to many different people. It's not just to veterans. Granted, the veteran population is a large population that has experienced PTSD, but they are not the only population to have experienced PTSD. So, it's usually after specific trauma. There's a frequent re-experiencing of the traumatic event. Categories of symptoms are bad thoughts, avoidance, negative alterations in cognition and mood. PTSD symptoms must last at least 1 month, but some symptoms may be delayed more than 6 months. Okay. And I think one thing with PTSD and just trauma to the brain, it does affect our mood, how we respond to people, how we react to people. It can cause some emotional like mood shifting. A person may not feel like they're really present because they're in the midst of like remembering something that happened from the past. Those are all the kinds of things that can happen with PTSD. There is some physical symptoms. Potentially a person can have flashbacks or things of that nature that would make them feel a type of way. So yeah, it can be very intense. We do notice this, as I mentioned, a lot with military personnel, but it is something that can happen with any kind of life experience. That's where we use treatment like EMDR, because EMDR helps with trauma. It's something that could be from a car accident. It could be from you being in a car accident. It could be a negative cognition or negative thought that was spoken to you, and now you feel a type of way about it. But there's a lot that falls into that category. It's broad, potentially. It's not so uncommon. You don't want to make sure you don't overgeneralize, right? But it is not uncommon. Acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder refers to these symptoms lasting between 3 and 1 month after a trauma. Distressing memories and dreams, negative mood, dissociation, and avoidance arousal. But acute stress disorder is what you'll see. Sometimes PTSD could evolve into acute stress disorder, but it is something that is debilitating and deeply affects our clientele. Separation anxiety disorder. Separation anxiety disorder is substantial distress during when one is separated from a major attachment figure. The distress must last 4 weeks in children. So initial distress about going to school is excluded. Separation anxiety must also be developmentally appropriate. We talk about secure attachment and insecure attachment. Some of what we see in insecure attachment is some like separation kind of anxiety. We see this in children often, like because of leaving them to go to school, where kids just have a really hard time detaching from parent. It's just something, unfortunately, that happens, and it can be frustrating for the parent. It can be frustrating for the school. But there are adults that feel this way. They might not act out in the same way, but they might feel that way when someone leaves or goes. There's this feeling of, don't leave me, I'm alone. And when really they're not alone, but that's just how it feels, you know? So just some food for thought. Epidemiology, I'm like always get that word wrong, of anxiety, obsessive compulsive, and trauma related disorders. Anxiety related disorders are common in general populations. I would say most people say they have some level of anxiety. The severity of it, I think, varies, but a lot of people would say they have anxiety. 28.8% of Americans affected at some point with anxiety, and 18.1% of Americans in the last 12 months. So we look here at panic disorders, all the different disorders we talked about: social anxiety disorder, specific phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, separation anxiety disorder. This is how often they happen. Not shocking that the highest one is, generalized. Well, specific phobias and social anxiety disorders are high. It doesn't surprise me that generalized anxiety disorder is like up there. Same with PTSD. But these are common disorders. Many experience of anxiety-related disorder symptoms without formal diagnosis. Anxiety-related disorders are common among women. Culturally specific anxiety disorders include, these are the ones where it's included. If you're interested in that, maybe you can check that out sometime. So yeah. So biological risk factors for anxiety. Genetics, anxiety-related disorders have a moderate genetic base. The amygdala and other brain features seem very specific to these disorders. The amygdala is like where like we store information in our brain. EMDR talks about how the amygdala is so important when we're trying to process things and put them in their proper order and space, to work through and deal with the trauma. Biological risk factors, behavior, inhibition, withdrawal from unfamiliar and new stimuli, and then evolutionary influence. Preparedness suggests humans are biologically prepared for fear certain stimuli. So if you see a snake, you're almost conditioned to have a reaction, even if you've never seen a snake in person, things of that nature. Environmental risk factors, distorted thinking about dangerous or various stimuli, assumptions that something is bad, assumptions of terrible consequences, assumptions that others can easily notice one's anxiety. People with anxiety-related disorders often have ongoing thoughts about threats from external events. People with generalized anxiety disorder often scan their environment looking for threats of things to worry about. Okay. A little bit of, I think it's trying to be protective, but it could be come off as maybe a little personalized, right? Some of the things that can happen. Anxiety, sensitivity, fear of the potential dangerousness of one's own internal sensations, such as dizziness and increased heart rate. There's some family factors: over controlling, affectionless, overprotective, rejecting, and demanding parents. And parents may model anxiety-based responses or induce anxiety by maltreating their children. So we talk about classical conditioning, operant conditioning. So classical conditioning is, we talk about Pavlov the dog, right? Like him getting the meat once the bell was ring. So operant conditioning is more negative reinforcement. And we are working with both of these, hoping that eventually will lead us to a place where we can work together, we can experience things, all the things, but due to our current state, we're kept separated, right? And so it's just finding a place or environment that feels safe where a client could go and process these things, and hopefully get some relief and not manifest itself in their everyday living. Ultimately, that would be the goal. There's a lot of different causes for anxiety-related disorders. I think we have to be mindful that oftentimes there is a genetic component. And so being aware of that as a clinician, as you're doing your intake, like, is this something that's family, like passed down, or is this something that I don't know where this came from, or it's situational? But these are great questions to ask. It's important to have a good history. I look forward to reading what you write in your discussion boards this week. I hope this is so very helpful.